Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a concept that is, well, it's both scientifically fascinating and, frankly, a bit daunting.
Uh-huh.
It's this idea that humanity isn't just on the planet anymore. We've become the main geological force that's actually shaping it.
Right.
And our source material for this is a really foundational text, Big World, Small Planet, Abundance Within Planetary Boundaries,
Yeah.
by Johann Rockström and Matthias Klim.
It's a huge book with a monumental message. I think our mission here, for you listening, is to really pull out the core insight
Because,
that we've fundamentally altered the Earth system, so much so that we've actually left the stable environment that, allowed our entire civilization to grow. And now we urgently need some guardrails,
Yeah.
scientific guardrails.
that's the critical point. This isn't just another book about feeling worried about the environment.
No, not at all.
It gives us a concrete, a quantifiable framework.
Yeah.
What we're unpacking today is this central concept of planetary boundaries.
Right. It shifts the whole conversation.
It does. It moves us from this vague worry about pollution to precise measured limits that define what they call a safe operating space for us.
And that safe space is based on the most stable period in Earth's recent history, the Holocene. That's our benchmark.
It's the ultimate reality check then.
It is. We're defining the planet's operating manual,
Hmm?
the conditions that we have to maintain if this whole human experiment is going to continue successfully.
So we'll dig into what those conditions were, how we went so far past them, and what a course correction might actually look like. Okay, so to really grasp the scale of the problem, we have to go back in time. 10,000 years back to the start of the Holocene. The authors call this the cradle of civilization. Let's set the scene. What was so special about the Holocene?
Well, the thing is, it was a geological rarity. It was just unusually stable.
Stable how?
For 10,000 years, right before the Industrial Revolution, the planet settled into this state that was warm, it was wet, and crucially, it was predictable.
And before that, it was chaos.
Pretty much. If you look at the ice ages before the Holocene, the climate was just violent. It would swing wildly, and human populations would, dwindle down to maybe 15,000 fertile adults just clinging on in a few safe spots.
Wow.
The Holocene gave us stability where there used to be constant violent change.
And that stability, that predictability, is the direct cause of maybe the biggest invention in our history.
You mean agriculture?
Exactly. Agriculture.
Precisely. The environmental conditions were so reliable, you had consistent temperatures, dependable monsoons, stable sea levels, that people all over the world who had no contact with each other all invented agriculture at pretty much the same time.
So this wasn't one genius invention. It was an idea whose time had come.
It was an idea the planet made possible, whether you were on the Nile or in the Yellow River Basin or Central America.
Yeah.
The planet was basically saying, yes, you can settle down now, you can plan for next year's harvest.
And that shift from nomadic hunter-gatherer to farmer, that's the key that unlocks everything else, isn't it?
It absolutely is, because once you can grow more food than you need,
A surplus. Yeah.
then not everyone has to be a farmer. You can have priests and soldiers, scribes, engineers. It allows for specialization.
And that specialization is what fuels technology, complex societies.
The rule of law, everything. The great civilizations, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mayans, they are all children of the Holocene stability. And it took that whole 10,000 years for humanity to reach its first billion people, which happened around 1800.
A very long, slow, steady curve.
Yeah.
But the book makes it so clear that this entire story just fundamentally breaks. First with the Industrial Revolution, and then it just goes into overdrive in the 1950s.
The Great Acceleration.
Yes, the Great Acceleration.
The Industrial Revolution was the moment we figured out how to break the old constraints. For the first time, we had this cheap, incredibly powerful energy source that we'd never really tapped before.
Fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels. It let us deploy massive amounts of mechanical power to do things that animal or wood power just never could. Clear land, build cities, transport goods.
And the source points to one specific technological breakthrough that just shattered a fundamental biological limit.
Ah, yes. The industrial production of fertilizer. We're talking about the Haber-Bosch process.
Unpack that for us. Why was that so important?
Well, before Haber-Bosch, all life on Earth was limited by how much nitrogen was naturally available. You needed bacteria or lightning strikes to convert nitrogen from the air into a form plants could use.
So there was a natural ceiling on how much food you could grow.
A very hard ceiling. But then we figured out how to use the immense energy from fossil fuels, mostly natural gas, to pull nitrogen out of the air ourselves and turn it into synthetic fertilizer.
We basically decoupled food production from the natural nitrogen cycle.
Exactly. And that, combined with things like better sanitation and modern medicine, is what caused that population curve to just go vertical. It's why all the data starts to look like a hockey stick right around 1950. The human enterprise became a planetary force.
And the book has that incredible chart of the Great Acceleration. When you look at all that data, what really jumps out,
It's the sheer comprehensiveness of it.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing. It's everything accelerating at the same time.
right?
You see atmospheric CO2, nitrous oxide, methane. They all spike. Surface temperature, ocean acidification, all of it goes up.
And on the other side of the ledger,
Rainforests disappear, land gets converted to cropland, and the extinction rate of species just rockets upwards. It's a complete systemic transformation, and it's driven entirely by us.
so the big narrative here, the big shift, is that we've gone from living in a small world on a big planet
Right, where we felt like a fly on an elephant, our impacts seemed negligible.
to now living in a big world with big impacts on a small planet.
And that changes everything. It means the planet's ecosystem functions, the clean air, the stable climate, they're no longer massive free subsidies to the world economy. That free ride we've been on for 10,000 years, it's over.
We've hit the ceiling.
We've hit the hardwired biophysical ceiling. We are now the managers of the planetary systems, and that means we have to start acting like it.
Which brings us squarely to the idea of limits.
Yeah, and we need to be clear about why scientists even developed this framework. This isn't about some vague idea that pollution is bad.
Right.
It's about knowing, with scientific precision, that we have to avoid disastrous tipping points.
And a tipping point in this context, what does that mean exactly? Is it a gradual decline?
No, and that's the scary part. It's not like turning a dial down. It's like flipping a switch. It's a sudden, non-linear, and often irreversible change in the way the Earth system works.
Okay.
So scientists identified 9 of these fundamental processes, climate, biodiversity, the water cycle, and so on, that could trigger one of these catastrophic flips. The planetary boundaries are basically a quantified set of limits to keep us away from those switches, to keep us in the safe, stable state of the Holocene.
And for each of those 9 processes, they have a measurable indicator, a control variable.
Exactly.
Let's start with the big one, the one everyone talks about, climate change. What are the numbers the source lays out for us?
The control variable here is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, measured in parts per million, or ppm. Okay. The pre-industrial level, our baseline, was about 280 ppm. The safe boundary, the precautionary level scientists set, was 350 ppm.
But we always hear the number 450 ppm in climate talks.
Yeah.
Where does that fit in?
That's a good question. 450 ppm is what's seen as the absolute maximum risk ceiling. The authors argue that if we go past 450 ppm for CO2 alone, we're almost certainly locking in things like the complete melting of the Greenland ice sheet over time.
So massive, irreversible changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Crossing 450 means we're essentially just gambling with the stability of the entire planet.
And the really worrying part, based on the data in the book, is that we've already flown past the safe boundary and we're bumping right up against that risk ceiling.
We are. We crossed the 350 ppm safe boundary back around 1990. The data from 2014, when the book was written, showed we were already nearing 400 ppm. But here's where it gets even more serious.
Go on.
They say that when you account for all the greenhouse gases, not just CO2, we are already at about 450 ppm CO2 equivalent.
Okay, that term CO2 equivalent is so important, but I think it gets glossed over. Can you break down what that actually means?
Sure. CO2 equivalent, or CO2e, is basically a way of converting the warming effect of other gases, like methane or nitrous oxide, into a single CO2 value.
So it's like a common currency for warming.
A perfect way to put it. Methane, for instance, is way more powerful at trapping heat than CO2, but it doesn't last as long. The CO2e calculation takes all those different gases and figures out what their total warming effect is, as if it were all coming from CO2.
So even if the CO2 reading is 399, the CO2e reading of 450 means the total warming punch from everything we're emitting has already hit that absolute risk ceiling.
You've got it. We are already operating in the danger zone. The source is very clear that on our current path, we're heading for 4 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100. And they describe that, without any hyperbole, as disastrous for humanity.
Disastrous because huge parts of the planet become What? Uninhabitable.
Uninhabitable. And the environmental stability we've built everything on for 10,000 years just vanishes.
So that's the first massive transgression. Let's touch on two others the book highlights as being way over the line. The first is biogeochemical flows, specifically the nitrogen cycle.
Right, and this goes straight back to that Haber-Bosch process we talked about.
Making fertilizer.
Making fertilizer. So nature has its own nitrogen budget. By making synthetic fertilizer, we just blew that budget wide open. The safe boundary is pretty clear. We shouldn't be pulling more than 44 million tons of nitrogen out of the atmosphere each year.
And where are we now?
We're at about 150 million tons a year. We blasted past that boundary back in the early 90s.
And the problem isn't just using it, it's the waste, right?
It's almost all waste. Only a fraction is actually taken up by the crops.
Yeah.
The rest just runs off the land, into rivers, and finally into the ocean. And that causes a process called eutrophication.
Eutrophication, that's the sciencey term for what creates those infamous dead zones. How does that work?
Well, when all that extra nitrogen hits the water, it's like dumping fuel on a fire for algae. You get these massive algal blooms. But then, when all that algae dies, it sinks to the bottom, bacteria start breaking it down, and in the process, they use up all the dissolved oxygen in the water.
And without oxygen?
Nothing can live. Fish, crabs, anything that needs oxygen either leaves or dies. You get these vast anoxic or dead zones.
And the book gives a real-world example of this, the Baltic Sea.
A prime example. Because of all the runoff from industrial agriculture in the countries around it, about 1/6 of the entire Baltic Sea is now a permanent dead zone. Just dead.
1/6? That's huge. And to get back to the safe space, we need to cut our nitrogen use by more than 2/3.
It gives you a sense of the scale of the transformation we need in our food systems.
The third major boundary they say we've crossed is biodiversity loss, or biosphere integrity. This one can feel a bit abstract, but they've found a way to quantify it.
They have. The control variable is the extinction rate. They measure it in EMSY, that's extinctions per million species per year.
Okay, so what's the natural rate? What's the baseline?
The geological background rate from the fossil record is incredibly low, somewhere between 0.1 and 1. That's the normal churn of life. So the safe boundary for us in the Anthropocene is to keep it below 10.
And where are we, really?
The current rate is estimated to be over 100 EMSY. Some estimates put it closer to 1,000 times the background rate. We are, without a doubt, in the middle of a mass extinction event.
And that's critical because biodiversity is what gives the planet its resilience, right?
It's the planet's insurance policy. The stability of the Holocene wasn't just about chemistry. It was about this complex web of life that provided redundancy. When you lose biodiversity, you weaken the whole system's ability to absorb shocks.
So climate, nitrogen, biodiversity, all deep in the red. And the last key point here is that these 9 boundaries aren't separate issues. They're all connected.
Completely. The authors call it the 3 musketeers, effect one for all and all for one. Transgressing one makes it way more likely you'll transgress another.
Give me an example.
Okay, so you push the climate change boundary by warming the oceans. That directly accelerates biodiversity loss by causing coral bleaching. Or changing land use by cutting down forests worsens climate change because you lose a carbon sink, which then leads to more extreme weather, which degrades the land even more. It's all one interconnected system. Failure in one part makes failure everywhere else more likely.
So if the boundaries are the guardrails on the road, let's talk about the forces that are pushing the car right off the cliff. The book describes 4 major squeezes that are tightening our room to maneuver. The first 2 are pretty straightforward. They're about human development, population and affluence.
Right. Population is still a huge driver. We hit 7 billion. We're heading for 9 or 10 billion by 2050. That's a lot of people needing resources. But, it's only half the picture.
Because the real story is consumption.
The real story is affluence. The goal of development is to lift people out of poverty. And as billions of people in Asia and Latin America rise into the global middle class, we're talking an estimated 3 billion more by 2030, their consumption patterns just fundamentally change the equation.
It's a total lifestyle shift.
Yeah.
You go from just needing basic food and shelter
to wanting a car, air conditioning, a smartphone, consumer goods. This incredible wave of new affluence just multiplies the impact of every single person.
which leads us right into the third squeeze.
Right.
Resource scarcity. The book calls it peak everything.
Yeah, and that's because our modern lifestyle is just incredibly material intensive.
Your smartphone, for instance.
Your smartphone, your TV, they have something like 50 different metals in them, many of which are really quite rare. And this is where we run into a huge contradiction of modern tech, something called the rebound effect.
Let's spend a second on the rebound effect, because that's the trap that cancels out so much of our progress, right?
Yeah, it's a huge trap. The idea is we get really good at making things more efficient. A single light bulb or a computer chip uses way less energy or materials than it used to.
Which sounds great.
It sounds great, but the problem is, because they're cheaper and more efficient, we just produce and consume exponentially more of them. The efficiency gain per unit is completely wiped out by the massive increase in the number of units.
So the net effect is we actually accelerate resource use, not slow it down.
Exactly. And the book gives some really startling examples of where this is leading us.
What are some of the most critical shortages?
Well, they estimate that antimony, which you need for batteries, could run out in 10 years. Silver, which is critical for solar panels, less than 5 years.
Wow.
And indium, which is in all our flat-screen TVs, consumption has already passed production. Its price went up tenfold in just 3 years. Now imagine what happens when those 3 billion new middle-class consumers start buying these things.
The system just can't handle it. And this isn't just an economic issue. It becomes a geopolitical one.
Oh, absolutely. Tantalum, which you need for your cell phone, has been a key driver of the conflict in the Congo. And we saw what happened when China, which controls over 90% of rare earth metals, decided to restrict exports back in 2010.
It creates instant instability.
Instant instability, military tension. The squeeze on resources translates directly into a squeeze on global security.
But there's a huge leverage point here that the authors bring up. Unlike oil, you can recycle metals.
You can, but we are terrible at it.
Yeah.
Our current recycling rates are shockingly low.
Like what?
For silver, it's about 16%. For copper, a fundamental industrial metal, it's only 31%.
That's abysmal.
It is. Analysts say we need to get to 90% recycling or more for most of these metals. But think about the potential. If we got to 95% recycling for copper, its economical supply would jump from about 30 years to over 600 years.
That's the power of a truly circular economy.
It's transformative.
And the peak everything idea obviously includes energy. The whole peak oil debate seems to have shifted.
It's shifted because it's basically already happened. The International Energy Agency admitted that the peak for conventional, easy-to-get crude oil probably happened around 2006.
So now we're on to the dregs. The unconventional stuff.
The unconventional, more expensive, and much dirtier stuff. Tar sands, shale oil. And these sources have a huge problem. They decline incredibly fast. A fracked well, for instance, might hit peak production and then drop off sharply within just 3 years.
So you're on this constant treadmill of having to drill more and more just to stay in the same place.
A very dangerous treadmill. It leads to more environmental risk, groundwater pollution, methane leaks. The book really suggests that this whole fossil fuel era might just be a very brief, very intense spike in human history.
And all this instability brings us to the fourth and final squeeze. The loss of resilience and tipping points, the big whammies. We tend to think of nature as linear. You damage it a little, performs a little worse. But the book says that's not how it works at all.
We have to throw that linear thinking out the window. Ecosystems don't just degrade gracefully. They absorb stress, they lose resilience quietly, and then they suddenly flip into a new degraded state, often irreversibly.
And a classic example of this is a coral reef.
A perfect example. A reef can handle some stress, but it gets hit with chronic stressors, warming water, pollution from runoff, overfishing. It gets weaker and weaker.
But it still looks like a reef.
It still looks like a reef. Then a big shock event comes along, like the big El Niño in 1998. And that one shock is enough to push the entire weakened system over the edge. It flips, the hard corals die off, and the whole thing becomes dominated by algae and soft corals.
And once it flips, it doesn't just flip back. You lose the coastal protection, the fish nurseries. All those services are gone.
They're gone. It shows how our local actions, a little pollution here, a little overfishing there, can add up to cause a massive systemic collapse.
The book gives two incredible anecdotes that show just how interconnected everything is now, how a local problem can have planetary consequences.
The first one, the link between Ebola and European fisheries is it's a stunning example of unintended consequences.
Walk us through it.
Okay, so the EU tightens its fishing quotas in its own waters to be more sustainable.
A good thing.
A good thing in theory, but these big international high-tech fishing fleets, they don't just go home. They move to the coast of West Africa, where regulations are weaker, and they rapidly deplete the local fish stocks.
So its sustainability policy in Europe creates a food scarcity problem in Africa.
Exactly. The local fishermen can't compete, their catches disappear, so what do they do for protein? They turn to hunting bushmeat chimpanzees, bats.
And that increases the contact between humans and animal populations that carry diseases.
And that is the pathway scientists believe allowed the Ebola virus to jump to humans and cause that massive outbreak. A fish quota decision in Brussels ends up causing a public health catastrophe in West Africa.
That's mind-blowing. And the second story, about the Arab Spring, connects environmental shocks directly to political revolution.
This one starts in 2010. Russia gets hit with a monster heat wave and drought. Their wheat harvest is wiped out.
Okay.
So Russia, a huge global exporter, bans wheat exports to protect its own people. At the same time, there are droughts in Australia and a lot of speculation on the global food markets. The result?
Global food prices go through the roof.
They skyrocket. And this hits countries in North Africa and the Middle East incredibly hard because they import most of their grain.
And that's the spark.
That was the match thrown into a very dry tinderbox of social and political frustration. Food riots break out, and those riots quickly spiral into the wider social unrest that became the Arab Spring.
So a drought in Russia helps topple governments thousands of miles away.
It shows that environmental shocks are not local anymore. They instantly ripple through our globalized trade and finance systems and can become major drivers of political instability.
Okay, so the description of the problem is pretty stark. But the authors are very clear that this isn't about the old environmentalist slogan of limits to growth.
No, that's not the message.
The great mind shift they're calling for is a move toward growth within a safe operating space on Earth.
And that reframing is absolutely essential. For decades, the debate was stuck in this false choice. You could either have economic development or you could protect the planet.
But not both.
Not both. This framework just flips that entire idea on its head. It says that future prosperity, future development now completely depends on us becoming wise stewards of nature's capital.
And the book really drives this home by putting a hard economic number on all the natural processes we've always just taken for granted. That free planetary ride.
And the number is just staggering. The estimated annual economic value of the world's ecosystem services, clean air, water filtration, pollination, all of it, is around $125 trillion.
$125 trillion. How does that compare to the global economy?
It's about 1.5 times the entire world's GDP.
So when we damage these systems, we're not just damaging the environment, we're eroding an asset base that is significantly larger than our entire global economy.
It's an act of colossal economic self-harm. Preserving these assets isn't a cost. It's the single smartest long-term investment we could possibly make.
The case studies in the book show this perfectly. The New York City water example is a classic.
It is. A while back, NYC realized the water from its watershed in the Catskill Mountains was getting polluted. They had a choice.
An engineering solution versus a nature solution.
Exactly. They could build a massive $10 billion water treatment plant. Or they could invest about $1.5 billion to protect and restore the Catskill forest ecosystem itself.
And it chose the forest.
They chose the forest. And the forest now naturally filters and purifies the water for them, better than any technology could, saving the city millions every single year. Nature is often the best and cheapest technology we have.
And on the flip side, the UK's story about their bumblebees shows what happens when you lose that natural capital.
Right. Industrial agriculture wiped out most of the wildflower meadows in the UK, and by 1988, the native short-haired bumblebee was gone. Extinct.
But they still needed pollination.
They still needed pollination, a service worth about £400 million a year to the UK economy. It got so bad they had to launch this controversial mission to go to Sweden and capture queen bees to try and reintroduce them. It just shows if you break it, you have to pay a very steep price to try and fix it.
And this leads to another really counterintuitive point in the book, that having strict regulations and boundaries can actually unleash innovation instead of stifling it.
It forces innovation. If you give industry a goal of, say, a 10% improvement, they'll just tinker with the existing tech.
Right.
But if you give them an absolute boundary, you must remove all lead from gasoline, you must eliminate all CFCs, you force them to invent something completely new, and that often opens up entirely new markets and technologies.
They use Sweden's carbon tax as an example of this.
It's a perfect example. Sweden has one of the highest carbon taxes in the world, about 100 euros per ton of CO2.
And it didn't crash their economy.
Far from it. It spurred massive investment and innovation in green technology. It made Sweden a global leader in sustainable solutions and actually made their economy more resilient for the long term.
We also have to come back to the rebound effect here. Even with amazing new tech, like Moore's law for computing, the source says it has to be domesticated.
The technology is a double-edged sword. Moore's law driving down the cost of solar panels is fantastic, but Moore's law driving down the cost of disposable electronics is a disaster.
Because the volume just explodes.
The volume explodes. They talk about refrigerators in the 1980s. They became way more energy efficient, but the net result was that people just bought much bigger ones, and global production tripled, so total energy use actually went up.
So the lesson is, technology is the tool.
But the planetary boundaries have to be the rules. Abundance is possible, but only within that safe operating space. So the book proposes this massive shift based on what it calls a dual-track strategy. It means we have to focus on transforming the two systems that are causing most of the damage.
Which are energy and food.
Energy and food.
Let's start with energy. The goal is decarbonization. What's the deadline, and what's the ultimate target?
The deadline, if we want to stay below 2 degrees of warming, is 2050. By then, the world's economies need to be almost completely decarbonized. But the goal is even more ambitious than that.
Which is?
In the second half of the century, we have to get to negative emissions. We actually have to be pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting in.
To deal with all the legacy emissions that are already up there.
Exactly. And since energy is responsible for about 2/3 of the problem, fixing energy is job number one.
The constant argument against this is the cost, that it's an economic burden.
And the research cited in the book just flatly refutes that. It shows that this transition is not a burden. It's actually a massive economic opportunity filled with profitable investments. The real economic risk is clinging to the dirty, inefficient growth model of the past.
So if the economics make sense, the problem is a lack of political will.
Yeah.
Specifically, putting a price on carbon.
That's the key policy lever. To get change at the speed and scale we need, you have to make polluting expensive. The analysis suggests we need a global carbon price somewhere between $50 and $100 per ton.
And where are we now?
Way too low. Schemes like the European trading system have often been stuck below $20 a ton. That's just not high enough to drive the kind of systemic change we need.
Okay, let's move to the second track, food systems. The book is blunt. It says agriculture is the single biggest transgressor of the planetary boundaries.
Is.
So what's the mandate for food by 2050?
It's a dual mandate, and both parts are non-negotiable. First, we have to increase food production by 50 to 70% to feed 9 or 10 billion people.
Okay, that's a huge increase.
It is. And here's the second part. We have to do it all on existing farmland. No more converting forests or savannas. This means we need a new, triply green revolution.
If we can't use more land, where does all that extra food come from?
It comes from a three-pronged strategy. First, we have to close the yield gap, meaning in many parts of the world, especially Africa, farms are producing way less than they're capable of. A maize farmer might be getting 1 ton per hectare when, with better techniques, they could be getting 3, 4, or 5 tons.
So there's huge untapped potential.
Huge potential. Second, we have to slash food waste. Right now, something like 25 to 30% of all the food we grow is just wasted. Fixing that is like adding millions of hectares of farmland back into the system for free.
And the third part is a fundamental change in how we farm. Conservation agriculture.
This is one of the most hopeful solutions. It includes things like no-tillage farming.
So you don't plow the fields?
You don't plow the fields. Plowing releases carbon and destroys the soil structure. With no-till, you just cut narrow slits for the seeds. It mimics a natural ecosystem. And you let the soil's organic matter and biology build back up.
And the climate benefit of that is massive.
It's potentially transformative. Healthy soil with lots of organic matter becomes a giant carbon sink. The book estimates that if this was adopted widely, we could actually shift agriculture from being a huge source of carbon to a sink. It could sequester over a gigaton of carbon a year.
That's more than 10% of our current global emissions.
just from changing how we treat the soil.
This idea that nature is the solution, not just the problem, is highlighted by a few other really cool examples.
Oh yeah, the story of the petrochemical plant in Sardinia is amazing.
Tell us.
It was this old, polluting industrial plant, but it gets transformed into a green biorefinery. And what they use as their raw material is an invasive weed, the artichoke thistle. They extract oil from it and use that to make biodegradable plastics.
That's incredible.
And what drove the innovation was a government policy that banned single-use plastic bags. The ban created the market for the nature-based solution.
And the example from India shows how a small change can solve multiple problems at once.
Yeah. In villages next to tiger habitats, people were going into the forest to collect firewood. This degraded the habitat and sometimes led to conflicts with tigers.
Right.
So the solution was to install these small biogas units in the villages. They run on cattle dung and provide clean cooking gas.
So people don't need to go into the forest for wood anymore.
Exactly. Firewood collection dropped by 70%. And as a bonus, because farmers wanted to collect the dung, they started keeping their cattle in stalls more often, which reduced the number of attacks by tigers. A single, simple energy solution fixed a habitat problem, a public health problem, and a human-wildlife conflict problem.
Finally, we have to talk about the Amazon rainforest and its connection to rainfall. This really shows how destroying one ecosystem can cause a climate failure somewhere else entirely.
The Amazon isn't just a collection of trees, it's a continental-scale climate regulator. It acts like a giant water pump.
Oh.
Through a process called evapotranspiration. The trees pump about 20 billion tons of moisture into the atmosphere every single day.
20 billion tons a day.
A day. And this moisture forms these huge flying rivers in the sky that travel south and provide the rain for Brazil's agricultural heartland and its biggest cities, like São Paulo.
So when deforestation spikes, like it did by almost 30% between 2012 and 2013,
Yeah.
the impact is felt thousands of miles away.
Mm-hmm.
That spike in deforestation was directly linked to the worst drought São Paulo had seen in 80 years. If the Amazon crosses its own tipping point and flips from a rainforest to a dry savanna,
It would destabilize the climate for the whole continent.
it would undermine Brazil's entire economy and have huge impacts on the global climate. Protecting the Amazon isn't just an environmental issue. It's a piece of critical regional infrastructure for human prosperity. Hashtag outro. So to kind of pull all this together from big world, small planet, the core message is really unambiguous. The incredible progress we've made against global poverty is profoundly fragile.
All of it.
All of it. All human development, all our prosperity. It absolutely depends on keeping our planet in a stable state. The good news, though, is that the solutions are there.
The technology, the creativity, the nature-based models for how to grow, it all exists. But none of it works without strong, science-based guardrails, without the boundaries.
You know, when we first saw that famous Earthrise photo from the Apollo 8 mission in 1968, we saw this single, fragile blue marble. It reinforced this idea of Earth as a global commons.
A shared resource that nobody really owned.
Exactly. And because nobody owned it, it was often managed poorly. But the authors here argue that in the Anthropocene, that whole idea is now obsolete. There's no global commons anymore.
Because there's no unowned space left, the fate of the Arctic ice sheet is now directly linked to the productivity of your local watershed. We are all connected, and we are now the operators of the entire system. We all own the consequences now.
So if every single action we take locally now has these measurable planetary consequences that feed directly back into our own lives and our own economies, how does that shift your personal definition of prosperity and of responsibility? Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.